Chapter 2 of the Paratus Intervention by Jeremiah D. McRoberts. "Jesus Christ, Larry," the burly man blurted, bursting through the door. "You want me to help you keep a secret I don't like about something I don't understand?" "Come on in, Commander. Have a seat," Larry said, amused. "Make yourself at home." The burly man was already seated across from Larry and pilfering through the candy dish on the corner of the desk between them. He replied through a chocolate peanut butter cup. "I guess you're the commander now." "Fine, Mr. Abraham," Larry agreed, only to be interrupted. "Father Abraham had many sons," the man insisted, "and I'm just one of them. You can call me Vance, boss." "And I cannot deal with you calling me boss," Larry said, only to be interrupted again. "Then you shouldn't have hired me." Vance was relentless. "Paid a lot of damn money for the privilege, too. You won't get one thin dime of my advance back, either." "Enough," Larry laughed, genuinely asking, "I take it you got your in brief?" "I don't have to give those now, do I?" "No, but as my chief of security, I'm going to need you to tweak the script." Sure, Vance said with a smile. "I can do the job, Larry. I'm just flabbergasted that it's a job you want me to do. Why aren't we holding a press conference from Scotland in the Israeli embassy, or maybe Belize, better weather?" "Hell, Vance," Larry admitted. "It might come to that. That's why I want you with me if it does. For now, I want to try and keep a lid on this. We can't stop the tide. Intervention is here. I'd like to try to channel the floodwaters, though." "They're going to do this to kids, Larry." Vance leaned forward and, swallowing, continued. "We both got out over this, and it was the right thing to do. The military is riddled with it now. Intervention was merely a recruitment tool when we got out. The coming thing and all. But it's not just tests and trials. It's not optional or voluntary anymore. The second year, every new recruit was coming in with it, prior to training. Washout rates dropped below 1%. These guys and gals have outperformed everyone so substantially that last year, top brass started climbing their way through the ranks and offering intervention or early out to all enlisted personnel. Everyone E7 and below has received at least some basic intervention. They're starting on the officers next year." "How is this not in the news?" "It is, or it was anyway," Vance answered, leaning back, throwing up his hands. "Nobody cares. Intervention's so widely accepted at this point, it just seems like the thing to do. You think anyone in front of a camera or behind a computer in the mainstream media hasn't had intervention? Or if they haven't, aren't super glad that everyone else has? Come on. It's been your career for the last 3.5 years, not mine. You didn't notice?" "I didn't," Larry admitted. "I just did the work and enjoyed the pay." "You turned it off," Vance said with a pointed finger. "You got out before they did it to you, only to come out here in civilian life and do it to everyone else. You've been kidding yourself. Don't kid yourself now." "Well, I'm sure as shit not going to argue with you about it, Vance," Larry grimaced and groaned, adding extra emphasis to the man's name, unfamiliar on his tongue. "Is this not why you hired me?" "In part," Larry laughed, "in no small part." "But are we really going to keep this a secret?" Vance asked again. "While they do it to our kids?" "We don't have kids," Larry replied. "That's part of why I hired you. But to answer your question, yes, for now. For now, I control the timetable. I control the protocols and the data maps. I control the equipment. They're going to do this with or without us, Vance, to the kids. I'm in a position to see that they do it right and keep this crazy new application technology under wraps for a while, for as long as possible. The second someone below me jeopardizes that, I want you on top of it. The second someone above me does, I want you at my side." "Damn it, Larry," Vance stood up to talk down to his new boss. "Unlike you, I have a retirement. 45 years old with a Navy officer's pension. The old USA Navy, the good retirement. They literally give me thousands of dollars a month to do nothing. So when I say I really don't need this, I want you to consider all the many, many ways in which that is true." "But," Larry prompted, drawing out the word. "But you've put me in a situation where I cannot say no. Not really, can I?" "They did the same thing to me, Vance. I couldn't say no either. Yeah, I suppose I see that. Welcome aboard, Larry offered, along with his hand, standing. Vance took it. They shook, strength on both sides. Come with me, Larry said, leaving the office. You need to meet the only other person on the project that you can talk to about your reservations as candidly as you can me. They walked down the beige hallway, passing door after door after door to the left and right, until coming to a loading dock at the terminus. Larry gestured to the right, and they went through the double doors there, entering into the back of a classroom. Dr. Ann Caro was instructing at its head, and paused to take a question. I think we all have a basic understanding of why intervention works, the person prefaced, asking, but how does it work? She paused a moment, considering before answering. I didn't invent the technology, and none of us here are technicians. Don't kid yourselves. We are interdisciplinary consultants. Remember that. Always. We observe and advise. We consider the effects of intervention from perspectives and knowledge bases not available to the technicians. And don't think you can or will do their job. You can't, and you won't. That said, as one of you who has worked with dozens of them for a few years, let me try to at least humor your curiosity. Unless we're about to have a surprise guest lecturer? No, and you go ahead, Larry permitted loudly. I'll save any corrections for the end. Excellent, she continued. Intervention works on the mind, but not the brain. For thousands of years, people have speculated as to whether there is some incorporeal part of us that exists beyond our biology. Don't get too excited. We still continue to wonder. What we are calling the mind in the emergent science of intervention is the collection of chemical and electrical activity that is created by the brain, but that are not actually organ tissue of the brain itself. Just under 8 years ago, the team led by Professor Hansu Nakoti oversaw the computer mapping of the mind. That is to say, everything the minds of 15,000 volunteers had experienced over a collective 4 million hours of observation was recorded, compared, classified, and cataloged so extensively that literally any thought, behavior, or instinctual drive a person might have, the active state of a human mind at any given time, could be emulated with modeling software. Attempts at downloading thoughts and memories into brains have been rudimentary and largely unsuccessful. Described by volunteers as crass, static, wooden, discordant, and unsurprisingly, artificial. Attempts at identifying thoughts a mind is actively having, according to the catalog, and intervening upon those thoughts, however, has all but revolutionized behavioral science and society itself over the last 4 years. There have been various technologies employed to both identify target thoughts as well as remove them from the mind, but they all exploit the same 3 scientific principles to do so. First, there is a delay between your organic brain producing a thought and your consciousness integrating it productively, whether through action or contemplation. This delay ranges from a fraction of a second to a full second in healthy brains and minds, to much longer in certain pathological minds or diseased or damaged brains. Second, advances in quantum physics regarding compensations for known unknowns, specifically those related to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, that are, frankly, beyond anyone in this room, other than Dr. Lanti, here in the peer group, and correct me if I'm wrong, Doctor, but none of us could understand even if you tried to explain it in more detail. Meaning no offense to my colleagues, Dr. Lanti offered, in his fading Jamnagar accent, but I must think that you are absolutely correct in that assumption. The same science that will one day allow us to teleport between planets and send spaceships sailing between the stars is currently being used to eliminate thoughts in the mind. If you'd like to understand better than that, take Dr. Lanti out for drinks after work. The third and final principle is the generation of a counterwave microburst applied to the mind, at the thought, temporally and spatially. In essence, it is a synthetic counter-thought. Don't get confused. This is not merely producing bravery to overcome fear in a general way, but like an anti-arachnophobia, an exact counter-thought not naturally created by our own minds, opposed to arachnophobia, for example, that eliminates the thought before you can even have it. They are mathematical inversions of very specific thoughts. Moreover, your specific manifestation of any number of arachnophobia-related thoughts are recorded, and ever more specific counterwaves tailored to you and your mind are automatically customized and refined, then carefully and expertly applied by our technicians. Over and over again to each attempt at thinking any thought in association with the thought group. When applied at the right time, this part I think you understand in the right way, intervention completely counters these unwanted thoughts before they are processed, effectively as though you had not thought them at all. This eventually, over time, and usually less than a dozen treatment sessions, conditions the brain to not even bother to try to think them anymore. Not even bother at all. None of it was new information to anyone in the room, not really. It was all in the news articles in some form or another. The scrawling mathematics were published along with conspiracy theories, doomsayers, and legitimate scientific criticism from 100 different related and unrelated disciplines. The Project in Brief folder that most still had in their laps had far more details than anything said here, yet for most of them, this was the first time they had really heard it. Heard it condensed enough to be accessible, but not so much as to be dismissed with a shoulder shrug. One by one, everyone heard the silence in the room and snapped out of their own individual reveries. Some thought about thinking and the removal of their thoughts. Others thought about how we only scratched the surface of what intervention could do, and how they were now a part of its expansion. And still others fantasized about how different aspects of the sciences converging for intervention might yet connect with other disciplines to revolutionize them as well, or even create entirely new fields. Larry watched their wheels turning and thought about how funny that idiom is when you have a stick you can toss in the spokes of the wheels at any time. More importantly, he saw a room of doers and dreamers and pitied them, and himself, that they had not come upon a technology more worthy of advancing. Between that and the meeting with Vance, he idly thought about retiring somewhere south of Puerto Incognito and leaving the rest of the world to its own mess, as he came forward to stand next to Anne. Larry touched his ear, activating his wireless mic, and addressed the group. We all remember how pivotal intervention was for integrating the flood of migrants into Europe, years and years after it was given up as a problem with no solution. They were there. They did not assimilate. The why of it all lost somewhere between irrelevant and unknowable. The rise in crime was considered a wave that would only recede in time. Then, criminals were offered a choice. A trial by increasingly angry citizens in which deportation was the only mercy they could hope for, or participation in intervention trials, then treatments, that would not only allow them to stay, but to stay peacefully. Many had suffered under tyrants. Many more had suffered worse under the conditions of the wandering refugee. Most of their violent crimes were misplaced rage, their drug use born of self-loathing shame and hopelessness. Most importantly, their desire to change for the better, to release their pain, and to do no harm to others was genuine, but for many seemingly impossible. Most jumped at the chance to purge themselves of their impurity and vice. Over the last few years, much of the rest of the world has followed suit. We all want to be our best selves. Most of us are too weak to get there, and intervention can provide us a fresh opportunity. It is easy to get excited about being part of that opportunity. Yet as members of this project, we must remember that our client, the NICED, and our patients, the children, the school children thereof, are not one and the same. The NICED wants to offer improvements to the educational environment to facilitate learning, but these children are not bad. There's nothing wrong with them. They have no perfect vision of themselves that we are going to help them achieve. Our goal here is not to expand on what intervention can do. We will not plumb the depths of this opportunity. We will be doing the opposite in many ways, to meddle with their minds as minimally as possible. We want to eliminate only the thoughts that make the school less safe, intervening upon threats, and, over time, improve the children's ability to learn and to focus, mitigating the use of pharmaceuticals, to free their minds, not to limit them. So we are or aren't here to control their behavior, a member of the peer group asked. As I've said, Larry answered. It just isn't that simple. In a larger sense, yes, we are. However, we aren't trying to stop attitudes, disagreement, or even aggression, as I have explained to the athletics director, but to intervene upon very specific thoughts that broadly inhibit learning, for the individual and for the collective. Because teachers can't do their jobs, someone shouted, but it wasn't clear if it was a comment or a question. Yes, Larry replied, continuing. Their job description has grown unmanageable in an environment that is increasingly hostile, both in general and in terms of their intended outcomes, propagating useful information to the next generation and producing adults capable of contributing more than they consume. We want the job of teacher to once again be limited to teaching, where they can theoretically excel, and let intervention resolve the need to overburden them with the responsibilities that limit their ability to teach. All the more to the benefit of every learner. Larry and Anne watched the ripple of head warbles that signified agreement and ultimately group consent. He fingered off his microphone and whispered to Anne playfully, Who needs intervention anyway? She laughed, turning her own mic back on, and inviting everyone. Let's give a hand to our project manager, VAD Lawrence J. James. The applause trickled in insubstantially, as befitting a corporate setting. But as it did, Larry shoved Vance toward the front. Already? Vance asked. Today? Now? Larry motioned for him to go on and turned to take his leave. Anne announced, And it looks like I'll also be introducing our Chief of Security, Vance Abraham, retired commander from the Allied States of America Navy. I served 12 years in the U.S. Navy first, Vance grumbled as he spoke into the microphone that was handed to him, continuing. But I don't guess that matters to any of you. Here's what you need to know about me. I'm a mean cuss who doesn't believe in what you do and will do everything in my power to make sure you don't exceed your mandate or share anything we have or do with anyone. Anyone! The guy you trust always trusts someone you shouldn't. We are monkeys playing with fire, and I don't care how many letters you have before or after your names, and I don't intend to let any of you burn down the jungle. Anne took the microphone back from Vance as he turned to walk off. Thank you, Mr. Abraham, she stammered before changing address. It's about lunchtime. I think a break is in order. We will reconvene at 1:30. Anne caught Vance in the hallway and barked at him. What the hells was that? You might as well have invited someone to break protocol just to spite you, just to prove to themselves that they can. Well, hello, Anne, Vance replied, taking her by the arm and walking further away from the dispersing peer group. You don't think I know about it, do you? You and Larry? That you two are getting it on, eh? Anne turned a bright shade of red and said nothing. But I do know, Vance continued. I've known Larry for a long time. His secretary thinks he hung the moon, and she's hot as hellfire besides. But he ain't doing her. Why? I would say it's simply because he has his eye on you, aiming a bit higher because you work out 3 hours a day and have a better education or whatever. But I saw the way he looked at you, the way you looked back at him. Neither of you did nothing wrong, but it is my job to know what you aren't telling, to see the hand you aren't showing and haven't played. You both had sex in your eyes. I've seen his often enough when the cats were calling, and yours reflected his own closely enough. I don't need a fancy brain map or a thought catalog to tell me what you two are thinking about. Not on that count. That is mighty presumptuous, Mr. Abraham, over nothing more than a few glances exchanged between coworkers? Well, it would be, Vance admitted, if it weren't all the other indicators of likelihood. I haven't heard Larry invite me to trust a woman, ever, but he said to trust you. Neither of you are married, unless you just don't like rings on that particular finger. They seem to fit fine on all the others. Most importantly, you two know each other well and are suddenly locked into a life of secrecy with relative strangers. So with all those factors at play, then I see the looks you two are exchanging. Yeah, it's still just a guess, but one I felt safe to make. One the color of your face seems to confirm. All right, Anne said, pulling at her shirt. So I'm supposed to be impressed? You know I'm a psychologist, right? I get what you're saying. Now, now I know you're good at your job. Okay, fine. That, Vance smiled and replied, softening his voice with her for the first time, was just my opening act. Yes, I know you're the psych doc. You have to evaluate how I am with people. You needed to have a sense of just how good I am, so that you understand why I did what I did with the interdisciplinary consultants back there. You see, not all of them will find a coworker to boink or even want to. There's going to be this big secret hole in their lives that they have to keep a wall around, and some of them can't do it. They just can't, and no one really knows that about themselves until they try and fail. So I'd rather go ahead and deal with those people now. Encourage them to screw up on the front end. Harmless, mitigatable, rather than later, when we have a data gold mine and spooks sniffing around our operation trying to find a weak link. Let's just go ahead and find and replace those links now, rather than watch the whole thing fall apart when we really need to depend on them. Shall we do that? In the meantime, you keep on opening up to Larry. He seems a lot more comfortable in all of this than I'd have expected, and that will make him much easier to work with. You both just let me do my job, so both of you can keep doing yours. He left the and each other implied but unspoken in the awkward pause before turning away. Anne just stood there, mouth slightly agape, as Vance continued down the hall without her. He was that damn good, and there was no denying it or anything else to say about it.